Picture this, your 18 veil on, hair pinned perfectly, everyone smiling like it's the happiest night of your life. Then the door closes. And instead of candles and kisses, you see strangers. Witnesses. Slaves. A woman in ceremonial robes. And, worst of all, a physician holding instruments like you're not a bride, you're evidence. Because in ancient Rome, your wedding night wasn't a private moment. It was a procedure. They called it tradition. They called it ancestral law. But what it really was verification. Proof that you were acceptable. Proof that the marriage was real. Proof your future children would be legitimate. And in the corner of the room, half hidden under heavy linen, there's a wooden figure standing like a secret everyone knows not to say out loud. You don't know what it is yet. But your mother does. That's why her hands shook when she fixed your hair at dawn. That's why she whispered one sentence you can't get out of your head. Don't resist. It only makes it worse. Tonight, you're about to learn why Rome didn't just celebrate marriage. Rome audited it. And when that cloth finally lifts, you'll understand why later writers tried to erase this ritual from memory completely. The terrifying part isn't the wooden figure. It's the fact that everyone in the room is calm. No one looks shocked. No one looks unsure. Because to them, this is as normal as signing a contract. In Niche, we tend to imagine Roman weddings as romance wrapped in ritual, music, torches, blessings. But Rome didn't build an empire on feelings. Rome built it on paperwork and control. Earlier that day, everything looked beautiful on the surface. The flame-colored veil. The hair parted with a spear point. The sacred words that basically said, "Where you go, I go." A vow that sounds poetic, until you realize it's also legal surrender. Because marriage in Rome wasn't primarily a love story. It was a transfer of authority. From father to husband. And transfers in Rome demanded witnesses. Think about how they treated land. Boundaries walked, contracts sealed, testimony recorded. Nothing assumed. Everything proven. Now imagine that same cold logic applied to a human body. That's what this night is. That's why the Pranuba is here, the official supervisor of what happens next. That's why the witnesses have been invited. That's why the physician is waiting. Your comfort doesn't matter. Only certainty does. And certainty in a Roman marriage had one brutal requirement. Someone had to confirm you were untouched, and then confirm you weren't. Now the Pranuba's grip tightens on your arm. She guides you toward the cloth-covered shape in the corner and whispers a name you've never heard before, softly like a prayer or a threat. Mutunus Tutunus. And she tells you must greet him, before your husband can even come near you. You reach for the cloth. The room leans in. And the second you pull it away, your stomach drops. What's under the cloth isn't just obscene. It's deliberate. A wooden idol, carved with uncomfortable anatomical precision. Life-sized enough that you instantly understand this wasn't made for decoration, or comedy, or some harmless fertility symbol you hang on a wall. It was built for a single function. And the worst part is how matter-of-fact the room stays. Like they're watching a scale being calibrated. The Pranuba doesn't ask if you're willing. She positions you. Corrects your posture. Adjusts the folds of your dress with the same practiced hands your mother used to braid your hair, except your mother wasn't here. She couldn't be. Because this is the part families pretend doesn't exist. They say the god's name again, Mutunus Tutunus, Rome's shadowy initiation deity that later writers mention with embarrassment, like even writing it stains the page. Centuries after, Christian authors will spit the story back with disgust. Not to protect you, but to prove how corrupt old Rome was. But here, tonight, no one is preaching. They're supervising. The ritual is framed as blessing, fertility, luck, protection from evil. But in the air, you feel the real purpose, submission in front of witnesses. A psychological breaking point. A line you cross where your body stops being yours in any meaningful way. And you realize something horrifying. Even if your husband feels uneasy, the ritual doesn't care. The ritual doesn't need his desire. It needs his compliance. You could refuse. Technically. Legally. But refusal doesn't mean you keep your dignity. Refusal means the marriage collapses and you go home branded as defective, unmarriageable, a humiliation your family will wear for decades. The kind of shame that follows your sisters. Your cousins. Your future. So your choice isn't really a choice. And when it's over, they don't comfort you. They wash you. Warm scented water. Cloths. Quiet murmurs. Not tenderness, preparation. Like cleaning a surface before inspection. Because the idol was only step one. Now the physician steps forward. And you finally understand why he's been waiting in silence this whole time. The physician doesn't look at you like a person. He looks at you like a case. In niche terms, this is where the story stops feeling like a wedding and starts feeling like a courtroom, because that's what Rome was building inside this bedroom, a future legal defense. He opens his pouch. Instruments. Cloth. A writing tablet, or someone ready to record. The witnesses don't leave. The pronuba doesn't turn away. Privacy isn't part of the design. Because Rome had a problem it obsessed over more than love, legitimacy. If heirs aren't unquestionably his, inheritance collapses. Names collapse. Power collapses. So the state, through custom, through law, through ritual, pushes itself right into your most intimate moment and calls it tradition. First, your virginity is confirmed. Not assumed. Not trusted. Confirmed. Then the night proceeds, and you're marched toward the bedchamber like the final room in a ritual maze. The doorway stays open. Lamps stay lit. You don't miss that detail, because it tells you everything. This isn't meant to be private. This is meant to be witnessed. Your husband enters and pauses, just for a second, and that hesitation hits you like ice. Not because it's kindness, but because it reveals the truth, even he is trapped inside the machine. He glances toward the pronuba the way a student looks at an examiner. And then her voice cuts through the room, formal and heavy, like a sentence being read aloud. The bride is made ready. Let the union be completed according to the customs of our ancestors. Let those present affirm the act. Affirm. That word is doing a lot of damage. Because what comes next isn't framed as intimacy. It's framed as proof. The night becomes a checklist Rome can defend later if anyone challenges the marriage, the heirs, the money, the family line. Hours pass in a haze of lamplight and ritual supervision. And right when you think the worst part must be over, the physician returns at dawn. Not to help you. To confirm what happened. To document the change. To turn your body into testimony. And that's when you realize the most horrifying thing about this ritual. It didn't end when the act ended. It ended when Rome was satisfied. Here's what makes this even darker: almost nobody wrote it down clearly. Not because it didn't happen, because it happened so routinely that describing it felt unnecessary. And also because even Romans had a line where embarrassment began. So what survives is fragmented. Side comments. Angry sermons. Medical notes written with the emotional temperature of a shopping list. And that's why this ritual feels like it's half erased from history. The silence is part of the system. Roman women rarely left records. Men did. And men had no incentive to describe the parts that would make Rome look monstrous. So centuries later, Christian writers come along and weaponize the story. They point at Mutunus Tutunus and say, see? This is pagan filth. Statues get smashed. Shrines get buried. Texts get copied less, or not at all. Not because anyone was mourning the brides. Because everyone was controlling the narrative. And once Christianity begins reshaping Rome, the wedding night transforms on paper. The pronuba becomes more symbolic. The open-door expectation fades. The idea of witnesses watching verification becomes harder to defend in a culture preaching modesty. But that doesn't mean the cruelty evaporates overnight. It just changes shape. That's the thing about rituals that serve power: they don't die. They adapt. And for the women who lived through the old version, women like the bride in our story, the world moved on without ever asking what it cost them. Imagine living 40 more years. Hosting dinners. Managing servants. Raising children. Standing in public as a respectable matron. While carrying a secret you can't speak without risking your family, your reputation, your daughter's futures. Because even if everyone knows what happens, no one admits it. That's how the erasure works. Not with one dramatic burning of books, though that happened too, but with generations of silence, selective memory, and polite phrases like custom and ancestral practice. And now, after all that silence, there's one question that won't let go. If Rome needed this level of proof to feel safe, what does that say about what Rome really feared? Because the ritual wasn't designed to protect the bride. It was designed to protect the system. And in the final part, we're going to connect the last, uncomfortable dots: why this had to be public, why it had to be witnessed, and what Rome was actually trying to prevent, by turning a wedding night into a trial. Rome's fear wasn't sex. It was uncertainty. In Niche, the twist is realizing this ritual wasn't random cruelty. It was a precision tool built for a society obsessed with lineage, because in Rome, a family wasn't just a family. It was a legal engine. An inheritance pipeline. A political weapon. One doubtful error could detonate everything. So the wedding night becomes a firewall. Witnesses aren't there to help. They're there so someone can stand in front of a magistrate years later and say, with a straight face, yes. I saw. Yes. It happened. Yes. The marriage was valid. The physician isn't there to heal. He's there to produce a record, something Rome trusted more than any woman's word. And the prenuba? She's the administrator of the crossing. The person who makes sure the bride becomes, officially, socially, irreversibly, a wife. That's why the ritual feels so cold. It's not about pleasure. It's not about affection. It's about converting a human being into a legally recognized role. And once you see that, the wooden idol stops being the main horror. It becomes a symbol of something bigger, how a civilization can be sophisticated and brutal at the same time, how law can be elegant while the people inside it are treated like property. That's also why Rome tried to erase it. Not only because later Christians found it obscene, but because later Romans wanted a cleaner legacy. They wanted marble statues, not open doors and witnesses. They wanted poetry, not procedures. They wanted to be remembered for roads, not for what they demanded of teenage brides behind sealed walls. And maybe that's the real haunting part, it almost worked. If angry Christian writers hadn't preserved their disgust, if medical texts hadn't been clinical enough to mention verification, if a few embarrassed scholars hadn't let names like Mutunus Tutunus slip onto the page, this would be gone. Not forgotten because it was unimportant, forgotten because the people it happened to weren't considered important enough to remember. So when you picture that bride again, veil, braids, torchlight, remember what Rome was actually celebrating. Not love. Control. And the next time someone tells you the past was more civilized, ask them one question. Civilized for who? If you're wondering, did this really happen exactly like that? That question is part of the story. Because the record is intentionally slippery. We don't have a neat Roman manual titled How to Conduct the Wedding Night Audit. What we have are shards, a pagan scholar who alludes and moves on, Christian writers who describe it while condemning it, and legal medical thinking that makes the whole thing feel chillingly plausible. So here's what's solid. Rome treated marriage as a legal status that hinged on consummation, and Roman culture was obsessed with legitimacy and heirs. That's not controversial. The unsettling part is the ritual around it, mutunus tutunus, the greeting, the public supervision, because that's where sources get embarrassed, euphemistic, or furious. And when sources behave like that, when they refuse detail, when they gesture and recoil, that's usually not a sign of innocence. It's a sign the thing is too recognizable to explain, and too shameful to narrate. So imagine being the bride again, years later, hearing people romanticize Roman weddings. Hearing talk of veils and torches and blessings, as if that's the whole story. And you realize, the world is praising the wrapper. While the inside, the part that shaped you, marked you, taught you what power really means, stays unspoken. That's how a society gets away with it. Not by convincing everyone it's good. By making it normal. By surrounding it with ceremonies so thick it feels sacred. By using the gods as a curtain. By bringing witnesses so resistance becomes social suicide. And once it's normal, the next generation inherits it without ever choosing it. Your mother cries while fixing your hair, and still tells you to comply. Not because she agrees. Because she knows what happens if you don't. That's the real horror Rome tried to erase. Not one obscene idol, not one invasive examination, not even one brutal night. But the mechanism. A machine that could turn a young woman into a legal object while everyone in the room called it order. And the final twist is this, the machine didn't vanish. It just changed names, changed costumes, changed centuries. Which means the scariest question isn't, how could Rome do this? It's, what do we call normal right now, that future people will beg to forget? Here's the moment that sticks with me. The part that makes the whole thing feel like a ghost story with paperwork. It's not the idol. It's the open door. Because an open door means the point wasn't intimacy. The point was visibility. Even if only a few people were in the room, the architecture of the ritual says, this is not yours. And once you accept that, everything else in the night snaps into focus. The crude street songs on the way to the house weren't just jokes. They were social pressure. A loud reminder that the city is watching, laughing, pushing you forward. The torches weren't just romantic. They were ceremonial spotlights. The prenuba wasn't just a helper. She was an official. A witness manager. A human stamp of approval. And when dawn comes and the physician returns, it's the final seal on the document Rome was really creating. A marriage no one can challenge without challenging the testimony of an entire room. That's why later generations get weird about it. Roman historians often glide past the ugly mechanics because Rome liked to tell stories where it looked dignified. And Christian writers, even while preserving the horror, framed it like propaganda. Look how depraved they were, instead of look what happened to women. So the bride disappears again. And yet, she's the only reason the story matters. Because Rome's glory, its law, its lineage, its legacy, was built on people who didn't get to narrate their own lives. So if there's a payoff here, it's not just shock. It's clarity. When you hear ancient tradition, don't picture marble and poetry first. Picture the closed room. The witnesses. The instruments. The quiet obedience everyone calls sacred. And picture the mother's warning, the most honest line in the whole ritual. Don't resist. Not because resistance is wrong. Because the system is stronger than you. That's what Rome hoped would vanish. Not the idol, not the name, not the gossip. But the understanding that power can dress itself up as holiness and call trauma a ceremony. So why does this story hit so hard, 2,000 years later? Because it forces a brutal reframe. Rome didn't just have weddings. It had enforcement. And enforcement always needs the same ingredients: witnesses, authority, and consequences. That's what made the bride comply. Not devotion. Not romance. The consequences. If she refused, the marriage could be declared invalid. Her family would absorb the shame. Her future would collapse into whispers: defective, dishonored, unfit. The punishment wasn't a whip. It was exile from social life. Rome understood something modern people still underestimate: you can control someone without chains if you control their reputation. And that's why the ritual had to be so thorough. It wasn't only about catching deception. It was about removing the bride's ability to claim her own truth later. Once witnesses have seen what the system wanted them to see, your story stops mattering. The pranuba can testify. The physician can testify. The household can testify. And in court, in inheritance disputes, in divorces, in power struggles, those voices outweigh yours. That's what makes it horrifying. Not just the act. The structure. A structure that turns the most intimate night of your life into evidence that can be used against you. And here's the final punch. When the world changed, when Christianity rose, when the ritual became unspeakable, they didn't memorialize the brides. They erased the procedure. They buried the statue. They cleaned the story. Because it's easier to condemn the past when it's vague. It's harder when you can see the machine clearly. So if Rome tried to erase it from history, they were trying to erase one specific realization. Civilizations don't always become cruel by accident. Sometimes cruelty is the feature that keeps the system stable. And when you understand that, you start seeing the pattern everywhere. Different time, different language, same logic. Which brings us to the last question this video leaves you with, one that should make you uneasy in the best way. If an empire needed witnesses in the bedroom to feel secure, what does that say about the kind of order it was built on? Here's the final twist: Rome didn't erase this ritual because it was fake. It got erased because it was too honest. It exposed the price of legitimacy. The hidden infrastructure behind noble names and spotless family trees. The part of empire that doesn't look good in marble. And if you zoom out, the idol, the witnesses, the physician, none of it is random. It's all the same obsession wearing different masks. Control the bloodline, and you control the future. That's why the bedroom became a courtroom. That's why a teenager in a wedding veil could be treated like a legal document. That's why even the people participating could look uneasy, and still go through with it. Because Rome wasn't asking them to feel good. Rome was asking them to comply. And somewhere in that house, after the lamps burned down and the testimony was basically sealed, a new Roman wife would stand up and put her veil away. Then she would step into public life and perform respectability, so well that no one would ever guess what the tradition demanded of her. She would raise children who would never hear the full story. She would attend weddings and smile. She might even braid her daughter's hair one dawn and feel her own hands tremble, because the ritual wasn't a rumor. It was a memory. And that's the part history can't fully capture, not just what was done, but what was carried. So when people romanticize Rome, remember both faces of it. The public face: torches, songs, saffron veils, blessings. And the hidden face: verification, witnesses, silence. Because the scariest things in history aren't always the ones people talked about the most. They're the ones everyone agreed to stop talking about. Now, before you leave with the image of Rome as uniquely monstrous, hold on. Because the reason this story survives at all is almost ironic. The people trying to destroy the ritual are the ones who accidentally preserved its outline. They didn't write, Here is a careful account so future generations can understand the bride's experience. They wrote, "Look how disgusting this was." And in doing that, they froze the shape of the thing Rome wanted blurred. That's why you'll see the same pattern in the sources: quick mentions, euphemisms, sudden shame, then a hard pivot away. A pagan writer avoids detail to stay respectable. A Christian writer gives detail to attack paganism. A medical writer gives detail because bodies are just bodies to him. Put those together and you don't get a full photograph. You get a silhouette. But the silhouette is enough to terrify, because it fits perfectly into Rome's worldview: witnesses for every major transfer, ritual for every legal transformation, public proof for private acts. And once you recognize that logic, you can spot the real reason the ritual was useful. It made doubt expensive. If everyone has already watched verification, anyone questioning the marriage later isn't just questioning the couple. They're questioning the witnesses, the household, the honor of the family, the competence of the pranuba, the integrity of the physician. Rome didn't just verify the bride. Rome verified the story. And the story, once verified, became stronger than the woman inside it. That's why the bride's feelings vanish from the archive. Not because she had none, because Rome didn't need them for the legal machine to run. So what do you do with a history like that? You don't just gawk at it. You notice how often power hides behind tradition. How often custom means someone benefits. How often shame is used like a leash. And if this story made your skin crawl, that reaction is doing something important. It's reminding you that the past wasn't simpler. It was just quieter about who it hurt. So let's end where the whole thing began, with that bride at 18, stepping into a house she didn't choose, toward a ritual she wasn't allowed to name. If Rome had succeeded completely, you wouldn't even be thinking about her right now. You'd be thinking about emperors and aqueducts. You'd be picturing weddings as torches and veils and poetry. That was the plan. Erase the mechanism. Keep the aesthetic. Because aesthetics are what empires leave behind when they don't want you asking what it cost. But the fragment survived, just enough to show that behind the public celebration was a private system designed to produce one thing above all else: certainty. Not love. Not consent. Certainty. And the most unsettling takeaway isn't just Rome did something horrifying. It's that Rome did it with paperwork energy. With calm faces. With witnesses who believed they were watching something necessary. With a culture that could transform trauma into tradition simply by repeating it long enough. So the next time you hear they tried to erase it from history, remember, erasure isn't always a bonfire. Sometimes it's a shrug. Sometimes it's embarrassment. Sometimes it's a civilization deciding a story is too ugly to keep telling, and then only telling the pretty parts until the ugly parts starve. And if you made it to the end, here's the question I want to leave you with, because it's the one Rome never wanted asked. How many human lives can a society spend just to make a bloodline feel secure?